Hello everyone, this is a worksheet on section 3.2 truth tables. You should be familiar with the following topics. So I'm going to let you read these over, but I'm going to move on to the actual worksheet itself. But again, you should be familiar with each one of these topics, not necessarily knowing them, but familiar with them. You should know the following without any hesitation. P and Q is true when both are true. P or Q is true when at least one is true. P if and only if Q is true when both have the same truth value. And finally, if P then Q is false only when a T then an F. So again, P and Q, true when they both are true, or at least one of them's true, if and only if they have the same truth value. And then the P, if then P, if then, the only time this one's false is when a T gives an F. Otherwise, that one's true. Okay, we want to complete the following truth table. In this table, P and Q represents some general statement. If you look at the very first column, right here, this column consists of the scenarios, okay? The different possibilities when working with two statements, P and Q. So we want to negate Q. To negate Q, we're going to look at the Q column, and when it's true, the negation is false. When it's false, the negation is true. When it's true, the negation is false. When it's false, the negation is true. Once again, the first two columns here are actually representing every possible combination of true, false associated with two simple statements, P and Q. Now in our next column, we are looking at the OR operation, and OR is true when at least one is true. At least one is true. Now we're working with the columns Q and P. OR is commutative, so it doesn't matter which one comes first. So in our first scenario, we have at least one true. In our second scenario, we have at least one true. In our third scenario, we have at least one true. In our fourth scenario, we don't have at least one true, so the OR is false. Once again, we have a truth table. We need to fill it out. Our first two columns are representing the various scenarios, for which we have 4 different scenarios when working with two simple statements. Our first column here, well actually our third column here, we want to determine Q and P. And is true when they both are true. Well, in our first scenario, both of them are true. In our second scenario, it's not the case, so it's false. The third scenario, not the case, so it's false. The fourth scenario, it's not the case, so it is false. In our last column, we want the negation of P. So when P is true, get a different color here, huh? When P is true, negation is false. When P is true, the negation is false. When P is false, the negation is true. When P is false, the negation is true. Okay, we want to complete the following truth table. Note it might be helpful to add more columns. The statements here are a little bit more complex than in the previous 2 slides. All right, so we have our 4 scenarios here on the left-hand side, over here. We're going to work with those 4 scenarios and determine if these statements are true or false. The one thing we want to take note of is you cannot distribute a negation sign. This negation sign does not distribute. What we need to do is actually work inside the parentheses first and determine what the truth value of the inside statement is. Well, that might require some additional columns. So I'm bringing in my grid here. So in order to figure out this statement here, I'm going to need to know what Q and P is. Well, Q and P is an AND statement is true when they both are true. They both are true. They're not both true. They're not both true. They're not both true. Now that I have Q and P, I can now determine the negation. I'm going to negate this particular column here. So when that column's true, it's false. When it's false, this is true. When it's false, this is true. When it's false, this is true. So now we have this column. So let's now move on to the second column. In order to complete the second column, I will need to know the negation of P. Well, when I negate P, I'm going to be looking at the column P. False, false, true, true. I'm going to need the negation of Q. The negation of Q column is false, true, false, true. Remember, I'm going back here to look at the negation of Q. All right, so let me clear that out for us. Now, back to it. I have the negation of P. I have the negation of Q. One day I'll get this right. So now I'm working on the AND. AND is true when they both are true. Notice I'm going to be working with these 2 columns here. And this is an AND, so both need to be true. This is not the case for the first scenario. It is not the case for the second scenario. It is not the case for the third scenario, but it is the case for the fourth scenario. So now I know that the negation of P and the negation of Q is true when actually the first of the 2 original simple statements are actually false. Okay, moving on. Again, we are being asked to fill in a truth table for these 2 particular statements. We may have to add additional columns. Now, one thing we need to be careful of, the if-then statement, which is being given here, okay, is not commutative. In other words, P then Q is different than Q then P. The other operators and, or, and if and only if are commutative. So they're not a problem, but this one has a direction. So let's bring in our table just in case we need it. Let's look at the first column. In our first column, we have Q then P. The if then is true. Well, no, actually, the if then is false only when a T then an F, right? Now be careful. We're working from Q to P. So you might want to rearrange things and put another P column such that you don't mess up. In other words, if you needed to, you could repeat the Q column. You could repeat the P column. Now you don't have to do this, but if it helps you keep things mentally in order, because we are working in this direction, when a T then a T, you're okay. An F then a T, you're okay. A T then an F, that's the one time the if then is false. an F then an F, you're okay. So that is the Q then P column. Now in order to complete the next column, we're going to need to know what the negation of P is. So we'll be negating our column P. False, false, true, true. We need to know the negation of the Q column. So we're going to negate this column. False, true, false, true. Now that we have the left and right side of this operator, which is an if-then, we can complete this column. We have things in order here. Again, I'm being careful because the if-then has direction to it. And everything's set up properly. So when an F, then an F, we're okay. An F, then a T, we're okay. A T, then an F, that's when it's bad. And then a T, then a T, we are okay. Now I'm going to add one little comment here. If you notice, these two columns are identical. What that is telling me is that these two statements are what is referred to as being equivalent. Something we have not covered at this point in time, but these two statements are actually equivalent. When two statements have the same truth values for all scenarios, they're considered equivalent. So let's move on now. Okay, here's our next table we're going to start working on. Once again, we have our scenarios, the different possible true-false combinations in the very beginning here. Okay. And now we need to construct these two statements here. So let's look at our first statement. Our first statement, we need to know the negation of P. So the negation of P, when P is true, false, false, true, true. We need to know the negation of Q, which is this column here. False, true, false, true. Now that we have the negation of P and the negation of Q, we can work with the if-then operator. Now again, we have direction. This is set up in the order in which it appears. So we can now work on the if-then. A false then a false is okay. A false then a true is okay. A true then a false is not okay. And a true then a true is okay. I have a gut feeling I just worked this one, but doesn't hurt to do it twice, right? Now, the next one, this statement requires the negation of P. Well, guess what? We already did that. It requires the negation of Q. We already did it. But this is an if and only if. If and only if is okay when they both have the same truth value. The two have the same truth value. So it's true. They don't have the same truth value. It's false. Maybe I need to darken that, huh? They don't have the same truth value. So it's false. They do have the same truth value. So it's true. And so that completes that table. Okay, now we're going to up it a little bit here. Our statement is getting a little bit more complicated. So once again, let's bring in our table or our grid, because we're going to have to add some additional columns. Well, if you look at this problem here, we can't do negation because we have to do inside the parentheses first. So we're looking for Q or P. We need Q or P. Well, we have P, we have Q over here, so we can calculate or is true when we have at least one T. In our first scenario, we have a T, we have a T, we have a T, but in our last scenario, we do not have a T. Now that we know what Q or P is, we can now negate that column. So again, I'm going to bring in another column, and that's going to be the negation of the Q or P column. That's this column here we're negating. So false, 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 true. Now if we look, we have the left side of our statement. We also have the right side of our statement. So we have everything we need to do in order to calculate the if-then here. So I'm going to erase this so we can see it, but we're ready for the if-then statement. Now notice we have direction. It doesn't hurt to add an additional column if you need it. So I'm going to repeat the P column right here. That way I'll avoid making a careless mistake. And now we are in the proper order. In other words, we have this statement here. If then, a false then a T, you're okay. A false then a T, you're okay. A false then a false, you're okay. And then a true then a false is not okay for if then. So you see how it is important that you know what and is, or is, if and only if, and then if then, what their truth values are. Another truth table to build here. We have two statements we're being asked to construct. So let's see what we have going on here. Here are the scenarios, remember? Right here are our 4 scenarios. That's what we're being asked to construct the truth table for in terms of these two statements. So let's bring in our grid just in case we need it. Let's look at the first one here. In order to complete this one, we need a negation of Q. So we're going to negate the Q column. Once we negate the Q column, well, we have this and we also have P, but again, I like to make sure things are in the direction of travel. Okay, so I'm going to just repeat the P column here. It's not going to hurt. So now I know that I am in the proper direction. The if then is true when, well, it's false only when a T gives an F. F then a T, you're okay. T gives us a T, you're okay. F gives an F, we're okay. A T gives an F, we are not okay. For the next statement, we're looking at P if and only if not Q. Well, P if and only if not Q, we need the P column, which we have here. We do have the not Q column right here. It's kind of messed up. I don't know if I can erase this. Well, actually, I can. Good. That's not too bad, huh? All right, well, P if and only if not Q. That's true when they match up. Well, these two things don't match up. False. These two things match up. True. These two things match up. True. These two things don't match up. False. So there's our table. Now this problem does look a little bit different here, but we're going to go through the same procedure. And if I would need to work on some additional columns, then I can do what I did in the previous video, get some scratch paper out, make a grid or whatever you need to do. But let's see. All right, so now in this case we have 3 simple statements right here. And here are the truth values associated with these 3 statements, okay? So we're not going through the complete list of different scenarios. We have picked out a particular scenario to work on. Well, P or, I hate when they put or here, but P or is true when they have at least one T. Well, the P is false and the or is false, so this one's false. Remember, or is true when at least one is true. Neither one's true. Now we're going to negate P or or. Well, we're negating this column here, so that's true. Now notice that we have the negation of P or or, and it's being joined to the Q with an and. So we're going to look at this value, and we're going to look at this value, and is true when they both are true. And yes, that is the case. Moving on to the next one here. Hey, there's different letters here. Where's the P, Q, and R? It doesn't matter. A, B, C, D, E, F. They're all letters here. There's no difference in the way they behave or the way you treat them. So we need the negation of B. Here is B, it's false, so this is true. We want to join A to the negation of B by way of the OR. So we look at false, we look at the negation of B, true. OR needs at least one T. We have at least one T, so it's true. A was false, but negation of B was true. It's an OR, so it's true. Now, let me erase that. So that was true. We're negating this column here. We're negating this column here. So this is false. Now we're joining this column to C by way of an AND, right? Well, here's C. C is true. The negation is false. And is true only when both are true, so this is false. So there's our table. True, true, false, false. Okay, I'll get rid of that for you. Here we go again. We're giving a particular scenario right here. I get my pen working. And then we're building several columns. If we need to, we can add additional columns, but let's see what we have. We're looking at Q, then OR. That's an if then. When a false, then a T, we're okay, so that's true. We're looking at Q if and only if P. So we're looking at Q if and only if P. Well, if and only if is true when they're both the same. Well, here's Q and P, right? If and only if they're not the same, so this one's false. Now note we're joining this column to this column by way of an AND. Well, AND is true when they both are true. Well, they're both not true, so this one's false also. Moving on down below, okay. Now we have, this one is empty. Oh my goodness, we got to think here, don't we? Oh, why would he do something like that to us? Well, that's Alex. Alex is trying to get you to think. We better start thinking. Now, if you know, if you notice, the negation of A is false, right? Because A is true. The negation of C is true because C was false. So if you think about this, this is B or false. That turned out to be true. So it must be the case that B is true. See how I thought about that? Because OR is true when at least one of them is true. Well, the negation of A is false. So B has to be true. I like this problem. I think I need to put this on the test, right? All right, let's move on to the next one. The negation of C is false. I mean true. Negation of C is right here. The negation of A is false. It's an if then. A T then an F is false. Now notice in the last one, this column is right here, and that is true. This column here is right here, and that's false. They're being joined with the if and only if, which is true when they're both the same. They're not the same, so this is false. Well, I'm getting tired here, people. So I think I got 2 more to go. So I'm going to fly through this. I'm going to need some additional columns to work with. I have 4 scenarios. I'm being asked to complete these 2 statements here. In order to complete the first one, I need the negation of Q. False, true, false, true. I need the negation of P. False, false, true, true. I have the negation of Q. I have the negation of P right here and here. I'm joining together with an or. I need at least one T. I don't have it. I have a T. I have a T. I have a T. So false, true, true, true. Right here, this statement, I need to work inside parentheses. I have the P right here. When not, you want to add it. Well, somebody just heard you. You want me to add it, so I'll repeat the P column. You can repeat columns if you need to. So go ahead. You got plenty of ink here, right? I need the negation of Q. That's right here. You want me to do it, so all right. I heard somebody say something. Could you please repeat this? Okay, you don't have to do this. I'm just messing with you. All right. Well, this is P and Q. I need P and Q. That's really what I need, right? P and not Q. Sorry, P and not Q. That's an and, so both have to be true. Nope. Yep. Nope. Nope. So P and not Q is this column. I'm now negating it. I'm now negating it. So opposite of false, true. Opposite of true, false. Opposite of false, true. Opposite of false, true. So true, false, true, true. So this is a T here. All right, there you go. Now I promise you this is the last one. Let's bring in the table. Let's get this thing started here. I am looking at this statement here. The first thing I need to do is I need to construct P then Q. Can you see why? So a T then a T, I'm okay. A T then an F, I'm not okay. An F then a T, I'm okay. An F then an F, I am okay. Now I need to negate this column here. So I'm going to negate this column here, right? So that's that right here. False, true, false, false. Now that I have this side here, I have P right here. I'm joining them with an and is true when they're both true. So true, false, no. True, true, yes. False, false, no. False, false, no. And that is my table, and I am done here. I hope this helps. I'll see you in class or somewhere out there on the internet.